So Governor Bill Lee here in Tennessee has introduced the Education Freedom Scholarship Act. And he says what this act will do is give parents here in Tennessee more options as to where to send their children to school. He said he's a big believer in that they should have more access to private schools, more access to Christian schools, and not just be limited to public education. He's also said that he is considering rejecting $1.8 billion in federal funding for public education. And so the opponents of these ideas are saying that this could potentially hurt public education and potentially crush it altogether. And I'd just like to go ahead and cut through all the bullshit and get right down to the point. I think that is his game plan. I think that's his end game. I think that's what he's out to do. Because anytime you hear people like Governor Bill Lee or House Speaker Mike Johnson talk about public education, they always find a way to demonize it, and they always find a way to build distrust amongst parents for public education. You always hear them talk about these liberal universities. These liberal universities are indoctrinating the children. Well, like I've always said, anytime they accuse our side of doing something, that's because that's what their side is doing. Teaching children facts and teaching children evidence and teaching children science is not indoctrination. Indoctrination is when you teach your kid that it was born imperfect and that the only way it can fix that imperfection is to pray to an invisible man in the sky who sent his son down to earth 2,000 years ago to die for their sins. And they can't question that. And they can't question anything you say. And anything out there that opposes this idea is sinful, and you're going to go to hell where you're going to be tortured and burned for all of eternity. That's indoctrination. Not learning facts, not learning science. That's not. But people like Governor Bill Lee and House Speaker Mike Johnson realizes that if their children goes out into the world and they've been raised to believe in this stuff and suddenly they take Jonah and the whale to a scientific debate, Jonah and the whale is going to fall apart pretty quick. Because someone's going to say, where is your evidence for that? And when they say, well, it's written in the Bible, they'll say, well, that's not real evidence, and then they're back to square one, and they realize that. And to people like Governor Bill Lee and House Speaker Mike Johnson and these MAGA Republicans, they want to be able to maintain control because they love the poorly educated. They don't want their children exposed to these ideas that is going to completely crush what they indoctrinated them to believe in. That's why they go out of their way to demonize schools every chance they get. That's why they go out of their way to fight all these culture wars and come up with these bullshit stories like the cat litter box and all that. They do that to develop a distrust amongst parents for public education. They're constantly trying to develop distrust in government, yet they're running for office. They want you to trust them with your government. They're constantly trying to develop a distrust in public education, but let us teach your children. Let us tell them what they need to learn. You know, they've done a damn good job over the years of developing distrust and sowing seeds of distrust. Anything the media says is fake news. You know, anything that science says, they don't know what they're talking about. Anything that medicine says, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't want your children to learn things that's going to go against what they've taught them because they want to be able to maintain control. And that's it in a nutshell. So there's a whole lot of people out there that's going to be kicking against this idea from Bill Lee, and they're going to say things like, well, this is going to hurt and crush public education. And they're right. But just call them out on it. Call them out and say, we know why you want to do this. We know why you want to get rid of public education. We know it's all about control to you. And it's all about indoctrinating our children to believe in stuff that cannot be proven, but that you can use to your own political and personal gain. You see, if you can just keep people, it's the perfect way to raise a kid. For these MAGA Republicans. They want their children brought up in churches. They want their children to be taught to never question anything. That way, when you hear someone stand up with science and evidence on their side, they can demonize that person real quick and say, don't you listen to him, that's the devil. I've actually had people say to me that science was of the devil, that God was trying to trick us. I remember one time I just started talking about Darwin, and I was explaining how that a lot of stuff I was taught growing up in church, our preacher would always talk about Charles Darwin, and he would say things that Charles Darwin had said. And when I got out there and read for myself and learned for myself, I realized that all this stuff this preacher had told me about Charles Darwin was bullshit. And so one day I'm expressing that, and a friend who's still caught up in that belief system goes, "Yeah, well, that's just the devil trying to trick you, buddy." They really believe that there's this prankster God in the sky who comes down here and plants all this scientific evidence to test people's faith. That's indoctrination. And that's why people like Governor Bill Lee and Mike Johnson wants to fight to preserve and protect that, because as long as they can make everyone stay in their lane, they can laugh all the way to the bank.